ECDO theory book there. So as you can see, the guy on the screen there is the same as the author of the book, Roger Cunningham. So this article is written by Tami Camarata, and she was at this conference in Colorado that hosted by Ben Davidson and attended by Roger Cunningham. So I'm just going to cover Tami's article about that conference. So Ben Davidson's theory is that every 6,000 years there's a micronova event from the sun that causes a geographic pole shift, whereas Roger Cunningham, or Ethical Skeptic, he believes it's triggered through the Earth's internal heat flows. As the iron in the Earth's core releases heat, as it changes from a hexagonal pack configuration to a cubic, it releases heat, which is causing global warming, and eventually he believes will lead to the pole shift. So to start out, she just talks a little about how he came to that conclusion over the course of 25 years. So he went to Egypt a number of times in the Giza Plateau, and he said his belief structures got overturned about history and all, and that he does not want to create negatives, scattered emotions, or dark energies in people's lives. I'm not sure he can be completely successful with that, because this is a pretty dark topic. But just to go through the rest of this article, let's see. He was candid about the theory's scope and limits. It could not be entirely proven by one person alone, he acknowledged, nor did he claim to be 100% correct in every detail. His objective was foundational: to introduce ECDO theory into scientific discourse and carry it past the threshold of ridicule and into the domain of serious, structured inquiry. And he really is the perfect person for that, because he's had a lot of success as a corporate executive. He was a keynote speaker at a conference of accounting or something like that. So he has the credentials for sure. As a managing partner of one of the 3 leading firms in engineering, planning, and construction, his expertise spanned work methods, foundation engineering, material science, and port engineering, including the behavior of seawalls, breakwaters, and quay walls under wave action and tidal erosion. The steps of applied technical knowledge allowed him to read the signature left on ancient structures with a practitioner's eye rather than a theorist's assumptions. In its simplest form, the ECDO theory describes an Earth that oscillates between 2 distinct rotational states, driven by the cycling of its own geomagnetic field. State 1 is the current North Pole location. Then State 2 is with the North Pole somewhere in southern Africa. And State 2 is the gyroscopic optimum. So Roger drew on his own conclusion from that finding. What is astounding, he noted, is that we're not actually rotating as a gyroscope. Those moments are in the wrong place. ECDO theory explains the mystery. When the geomagnetic field collapses below a critical threshold, the outer rotational body of the Earth, the mantle, the lithosphere, and hydrosphere become free to rotate as a gyroscope. It then moves naturally to that gyroscopic optimum, which just happens to be 104 degrees offset from our current pole alignment. He acknowledges the thinkers who gestured toward this territory before him, including Charles Hapgood. He noted that their work lacked what ECDO provides, a causal mechanism. The overlap between his hypothesis and prior art, he estimated, was approximately 1%. So his visits to the Giza Plateau had been neither casual nor confined to the tourist path. They included access to areas typically closed to guided tourism, such as the Queen's Chamber, where he observed firsthand the leoparding patterns and quicklime decay on the walls. This kind of direct practitioner-level observation distinguished his reading of the monuments from conventional Egyptology. And Giza is central to ECDO's theory. The plateau sits on the 31st meridian of longitude, along which the Janibekov rotation occurs, and its position lies tantalizingly close to bisecting the midpoint of the 104-degree angle between the current rotational pole and NP prime. So NP is North Pole, of course, and prime just indicates it's the alternate location, the former North Pole under State 2. It also marks the geographic center of the Earth's entire landmass. Looking inside the Khufu Pyramid at its 8-degree latitude offset southward from that geographic centroid, Roger described an authentication technique comparable in elegance to how Eratosthenes measured the circumference of the Earth by comparing the angle of sunlight between two wells in Egypt and Greece. He stressed that 175 cultural flood myths describing major worldwide inundation had been persistently ignored by mainstream science, unwisely so. As the presentation turned to present-day indicators of an Earth in transition, he identified the South African magnetic anomaly, an expanding weak zone in Earth's geomagnetic field, as a key marker. He described the rapid movement of the magnetic pole since 1973, accelerating towards Siberia, as the beginning signs of a geomagnetic excursion. Commensurate with that, he said, is what I call the sloughing of the Earth's core. Core material migrates outward into the mantle at the core mantle boundary, the D layer, releasing heat in the process. The mechanism is an exothermic phase change. Hexagonal close-packed iron, or HCP as an acronym, transforming into face-centered cubic iron, FCC, a structural reorganization at the atomic lattice level that releases a massive amount of thermal and kinetic energy. Roger raised the second law of thermodynamics and the law of entropy as sound scientific backing for ECDO, in direct contrast to what he calls thermos Earth, a model derived from the 1800s in which the lithosphere and oceans trap and retain heat like an insulating shell, a model that had gone largely unquestioned ever since. At a certain point during an excursion, the D layer causes the core and the mantle to decouple. When the geomagnetic field drops below a critical threshold, the outer rotational body, mantle, lithosphere, and hydrosphere, becomes free to rotate as a gyroscope, while the inner core remains anchored by the alpha and phi scalar fields of the sun. The outer body moves towards its gyroscopic optimum, resulting in sudden true polar wander. True polar wander is a zero-energy vehicle, Roger said. It doesn't require an outside intervention. It cycles back and forth, he added, based in part on the theory Ben developed on the sun. Ben Davidson. The ancients, he observed, constructed monuments in the method they knew best to tell the future generations the story of what happened, or to allow them to piece it together. The reason we had not seen this, he argued, lay in biased cultural mechanisms that prevented professionals, scientists, and society from recognizing these principles, including a false definition of pseudoscience that excludes professional expertise lacking academic credentials. By his definition, the conclusion that the Khafre pyramid was built in 2540 BC by Pharaoh Khufu is a proclamation of pseudoscience. Of ECDO's 35 predictions, Roger noted 34 had been confirmed. The 34th was among the most striking. Ancient monuments consistently show orientation to NP prime, the alternate North Pole location in southern Africa. The team projected the former North Pole location using centroids of the LLSVP structures in the mantle and found that the monuments bore it out. We asked the question, we proposed a risk, and we made an observation which satisfied that risk. That is the process of science. And yeah, the gold standard of science is making correct predictions, as Richard Feynman would say. The 35th prediction, newer on the frontier, came from the ECDO database of every building and road across the planet. All those cities above 2,500 feet in elevation globally bear an obsequience to NP prime. Of all those cities below 2,500 feet in elevation, they bear obsequience to our current North Pole. The physical evidence on the monuments was unambiguous to a trained eye. On the Khafre Pyramid, Roger identified a parabolic erosion band whose height corresponds to sea state 8. The demarcation line resulted from the differential behavior of two distinct limestones. The harder resisting carbonic acid dissolution, the softer yielding to it, producing a clean boundary between submerged and unsubmerged portions. He had observed the same receding water signatures in shorelines from Riyadh to the Persian Gulf. The Dixon relics he submitted, indicating tomb raiding activity dating 900 years before the pyramid was built, according to the conventional narrative. The Sphinx, showing alternating erosion patterns resembling lasagna, the product of oscillation between state 1 and state 2 and the resulting cycles of oceanic submersion. Roger described true polar wander as the relationship between the geomagnetic pole and the Euler rotation of the outer body of the Earth around the core. In other words, core-mantle decoupling. The cascade from a geomagnetic excursion provides degrees of freedom for the mantle to operate as a gyroscope, requiring no added energy. When the first examined LLSVP, he developed a theoretical center of mass for the South African LLSVP that landed in Zambia, before he was aware of the 104-degree principle. He clarified that the SAC South Atlantic and the Pacific LLSVPs are not structures of added mass, but centroids of low-density structures whose significance lies in their absence of mass. Once geomagnetic eccentricity is taken away, he said, returning to the Grace geoid, the Earth rotates as a gyroscope and rotates this 104-degree angle, the gyroscopically mediated Cherenkov oscillation. 5 forces normally keep the core and the mantle locked together: viscous coupling, electromagnetic coupling, the Lorentz force, topographic coupling through asymmetrical pressure of the LSVPs, and gravitational coupling. The weakening of the geomagnetic field eliminates all but gravitational coupling. The transition between states carries a clear thermal signature. Moving from state 1 to state 2 brings a slowly increasing hot climate that precipitates into sudden true polar wander. The return journey presents the inverse, a sudden cold climate followed by slow recovery to state 1. The timeline, he noted wryly, could be 200,000 years away, or perhaps 2030, depending on which math is used. Independent confirmation came from Craig Stone, Nobulart, who treated all tectonic striations on Earth as a database and found both sets converge in concentric commonality, bifurcated along the median of rotation with centers at the Euler axes. Oceanic displacement followed the same pattern. High elevation chevrons, diatomaceous salt deposits, and saline deserts in the American Southwest. East-west striations in Patagonia, striations from the Mediterranean deflected onto West Africa's coast by the Coriolis effect. A histogram of ancient monuments older than 500 BC showed that 80% point to NP prime, with older monuments orienting more consistently toward the former North Pole. On climate, Roger presented the mismatch between the linear global temperature curve and the accelerating atmospheric CO2 curve. Data from Mauna Loa pointed to more than one factor at work. Normalization of northern hemisphere Keeling curves placed the inflection point in 1973, the year, polar motion, dynamic changes, geomagnetic North Pole movement, and climate heat progression converged. An exceptional pulse occurred, he said, making 1973 as the opening of the modern geomagnetic excursion. He emphasized findings from the Deep Argo program at abyssal depths, roughly 4,000 to 6,000 meters, noting measurable warming between 2022 and 2023 that mainstream discussions had largely overlooked. The centroid of planetary heat, he argued, lies beneath the abyssal ocean floor, with temperatures rising with depth. The 2023 abyssal heat pulse offered an energetic explanation for subsequent surface warming seen in SST anomalies. He summarized a clear trend. When we look at it over the past 20 years, every single ocean current on the planet has sped up by 25%. Addressing the cyclical nature of geomagnetic collapse, Roger concluded by explaining how the system returns to its original state. The central question he posed was this: if the Earth undergoes a pole shift, why wouldn't it simply remain in the new orientation? That is where Ben Davidson's governing principle comes into play. The A and phi scalar fields of the Sun act to recharge the E field matrix inside the core. During periods of high geomagnetic energy loss, the ordered axial structures of hexagonal close-pack iron in the core becomes disordered, with the electric scalar potential vectors shifting from alignment with Earth's rotational axis to an equatorial orientation parallel to the geographic horizon. This disarray, he noted, goes away when we lose our magnetic field. As hexagonal close-pack iron is shed from the inner core boundary into the D layer, the exothermic phase transformation to fixed cubic releases enthalpic energy, heat, in Roger's words, into the lower mantle. The collapse of the dipole field removes the electromagnetic conditions that sustain the disorder, allowing axial lattice order to reestablish. Solar magnetic vector potential and electric scalar potential then couple back into the restored lattice, recharging the inner core and completing the cycle. In other words, the Sun functions as a wireless conducting recharge of our core. So that's the end of the Ethical Skeptic, or Roger Cunningham's portion. Then she goes over Ben Davidson's theory about how the Sun triggers this geographic pole shift. And then Roger's reaction to that, to Ben Davidson's presentation. Roger noted that for a star to nova, it must reach 1.4 solar masses, 40% larger than our Sun. So in theory, our Sun cannot nova. He presented the nuclear binding energy curve, tracing its path from the deep drop at helium-4 through the elemental spectrum down to its floor at iron, then rising again to uranium-238. Framing this as the life cycle of a star, Roger explained that smaller stars burn hydrogen at the highest energy point and appear white. As they progress to heavier isotopes and mix with helium, they become yellow, like our Sun. If a star remained below the Chandrasekhar limit, it burns down the curve until it exhausts its fuel and decays into a dormant iron star. Along this continuum, he highlighted one little interesting hiccup, the helium-4 hook. Because fusing helium-4 into lithium-6 requires more energy than our Sun can provide, helium-4 accumulates as non-combustible ash, forming black ash bands approximately 40% and 80% out from the core. These barriers eventually block continuous fusion. Roger proposed the hyper CME, or micronova, coronal mass ejection, CME, or micronova, serves as the natural mechanism to reject this chronic helium-4 buildup through a violent systemic shedding event. So then, the article goes, just as a couple left, Ben contrasted Earth's polar orientations under the ECDO framework with his own micronova version, while the ECDO model constrains future predictions with past observations. The micronova model uses theoretical modeling to forecast future evidence. My heart and head are trending this way, Ben summarized, because I believe that Roger has better observational evidence of where the pole was last time, even as his own framework offers a compelling explanation for the trend into a future state. In the spirit of Lakatos, the philosopher of science, who wrote that intellectual honesty consists in specifying precisely the conditions under which one is willing to give up one's position, Ben acknowledged that accumulating evidence had led him to abandon his earlier conviction of only two states. He highlighted the promising models of Craig Stone and Zacharias Pro as having great potential to lead the way. Some of Ben's final comments centered on a critique of ECDO's reliance on mainstream core models, suggesting that the framework would benefit from greater consideration of a clear and potentially critical external influence. He described the ECDO event with its deep mantle involvement as potentially even more devastating than his own model and requested further detail from the full team. The generally more novel, conflicting LLSVP density science was called into question, a point that even causes contention in the realm of mainstream science, while noting that these structures exhibit good conductance. If magnetic dissipation is occurring as rapidly as assumed, Ben argued, the micronova provides the necessary external trigger to recharge the core. The LLSVPs are the pipeline directly to the core for instantaneous, potentially one-day, recharging of the entire planet. In his view, these mantle heterogeneities would undergo catastrophic melt and later renewal. There were countless compelling questions during the Q&A sessions. Owing to limitations of space, we will not be able to accommodate them all in this piece. However, one in particular prompted Ben to raise a salient point. Saving technology itself is not the priority. Rather, the greater challenge lies in finding ways to communicate to future societies, assuming a reset in written communication, the importance of our present scientific understanding of past cataclysmic events through a permanent medium capable of surviving the crumbling of current empires into the sea. The several-day colloquium provided a rare opportunity to elucidate complementary perspectives, sharpen insights, and open promising new avenues for collaboration. Two of the century's more iconoclastic minds emerged with an intuitive recognition that mechanical glitches lay waiting to be explored across Earth's systems and beyond. Where credentialed consensus had drawn its boundaries, they chose instead to follow the evidence, across disciplines, across datasets, across the uncomfortable distances between what is observed and what is officially acknowledged. One set sail, the other initiated ignition sequence, embarking on an odyssey toward the most important vestiges of human knowledge. With a gravity assist from fellow obsessive Asperger's minds in functional mode, their voyage continues every day. And she has a link to Ben Davidson's summary of the conference there. So, and the full conference is available for a price to be viewed still, as it was recorded on video. So anyway, I just wanted to go through that article and hope y'all hope to start a conversation around it.